So we're going to introduce land use regulation in this video. And so we'll start off by talking about what are the goals of land use regulation. So the first and most obvious one is sustainable development. Okay, so the reason why governments want to intervene in the planning of communities and cities is that they want the communities and cities to be organized in a way that is kind of forward thinking rather than short term thinking and just doing what's immediately kind of needed. There's the intention is to plan the community out so that over the long run the community is gonna kind of work well. And so, for example, they don't want things done haphazardly where, a school is built and then right across the street is, whatever, a strip club. This is the most vivid kind of example of what happens when there's kind of no zoning or uh, land use regulation. You have uses of parcels of land that are maybe near each other that aren't really compatible with each other. So the idea of land use regulation is have some to try to impose some order to the development of real estate in cities and communities, um, so that it's not done in a haphazard, short-termism kind of way. Now, does it always achieve these ends? We're going to talk about that later in this module about kind of the problems with land use regulation and kind of this top-down approach to planning. But at least the intention needs to be stated as to kind of why this system exists. Okay, another goal of land use regulation is to promote public safety and welfare. So, um, again, this is kind of related to this idea of the strip club right across the street from the school. Um, Not only in the use of parcels, it's also the implementation of building codes. So, for example, in California, there are kind of building standards to make buildings safe from earthquake because this is a danger in California. There's uh, regulations on kind of fire safety where buildings of a certain height have to have certain construction and sprinkler systems and all this kind of stuff. So there is some intention in mind to have standards in place and enforced by law so that public safety and welfare are maximized. Another related issue or point to public safety is environmental protection because people are affected by the environment. So environmental protection is another big goal of land use regulation. So development is regulated by ideas related to the protection of environment. So, for example, if a building wants to go up on the habitat for a certain type of animal that's maybe endangered, then we have certain laws in California that will prevent that from happening. During construction, there's going to be certain environmental protection measures that are required for the construction company to take so that there's no runoff or other environmental contamination from the construction process. Um, if there's been environmental contamination on a property, a developer will be forced to clean that up before they can proceed with their development. So this is a way to kind of uh, fix past harms that may have gone kind of unchecked. So a big example of this are when uh, former military bases want to be redeveloped. I remember reading about how there was some uh, Air Force base that existed, and the Air Force base was shut down, and the developer wanted to kind of uh, build residential property on it, I believe. And there had been a lot of chemicals that had been spilled into the ground when it was used as an Air Force base. So the developer would have been required to clean all of that up before they could proceed with the development of the residential property. I was involved in a real estate development where there was a railroad track that went through the property some time ago. It no longer existed, but the railroad ties, those pieces of wood, upon which the railroad sits, they're treated with some chemical, and over time, as it rains, the chemicals, and it's mostly arsenic. That's maybe the one that's like of most concern to the environmental regulators. It seeps into the soil. So this development project, which was eventually going to be a mid-rise residential kind of apartment building, a 5, 6 story building, uh, before that building could happen, we needed to dig out a bunch of the soil and have it transported away to facility that kind of stores toxic soil. And it was, several $100,000 to do this. It took a lot of time. You had to pay consultants. You had to kind of bring in the government regulators and make sure it was done properly. So, these environmental uh, land use kind of protections are to safeguard the environment. And there's trade-offs to them too. So, we're going to discuss some of that later in this module. Okay, so economic efficiency is related to the idea that city planners want to maximize the economic output and use of particular communities' land. So they want to put the commercial uses, for example, retail, put all the malls kind of in strategically position locations in the community to kind of make it easy for people to shop, for example, or they're going to position the industrial areas near freeways so people can get to them more easily if they're commuting from a particular part of the community. So there's going to be some thought process as to what is going to make the economic situation in the community most efficiently run by uh, kind of planning where you're going to do certain things within the community. So this is another kind of goal of the land use regulation framework. And then there's also just a social kind of equity component where land use, there's a lot of emphasis, for example, on affordable housing. So developers, for example, will be able to build more units on a property than they otherwise would have, as long as those units are kind of available for affordable housing, meaning it can only be kind of rented or sold to people with a certain threshold of income or lower. Also, just making sure the amenities in a community are kind of available for all parts of it, all neighborhoods. So there's going to be some component of just making sure that all the retail space isn't kind of in the areas that are higher end, or are going to attract the higher end people, or where the wealthier people live. So through city planning, you can try to achieve some of these social equity goals that planners have, or at least that is the intention.